April 14, 1983. Johnny Carson was in the middle of a routine monologue when a trembling stage manager walked onto the set of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, holding a pale blue envelope marked urgent. And inside was a letter from a dying single mother that would stop the broadcast, silence a laughing studio audience, and create one of the most heartbreaking moments in television history. The show had started like any other Thursday night in Burbank, with Johnny delivering crisp one-liners about Washington politics and springtime in California, the audience responding with the easy, familiar laughter that had defined his reign over late night for more than 2 decades, everything polished, timed, and effortless as always. It was supposed to be another smooth episode, another hour of celebrity interviews and playful banter, but 7 minutes into his monologue, Alan Pierce, a stage manager who had never once stepped in a camera view during a live taping, did exactly that, moving carefully but urgently across the stage while the band fell awkwardly quiet. Johnny stopped mid-sentence, instinctively aware that something unusual was unfolding, and the crowd's laughter faded into confusion as Alan handed him the envelope without a word. Written across the front in careful handwriting were the words, "Please give to Mr. Carson immediately," and in the top left corner, a return address that read, Rachel Monroe, St. Vincent Medical Center, Los Angeles. Johnny studied the name for a moment, then looked up at the audience, offering a half-smile that carried a hint of concern. "Folks," he said gently, adjusting his tie, "I think we may need to pause the jokes for a second." A murmur rippled through the studio as he opened the envelope and unfolded a single sheet of lined paper, the handwriting steady but clearly written with effort. At first he read silently, and those watching could see the subtle shift in his expression, the familiar smirk fading, replaced by something more fragile, more human. Ed McMahon leaned slightly forward, sensing the gravity of the moment, while crew members near the cameras exchanged worried glances. Johnny swallowed, folded the page once, then unfolded it again as if needing to steady himself. "I'm going to read this to you," he said quietly, and suddenly the studio that had moments before been alive with laughter became utterly still. "Dear Mr. Carson," he began, his voice measured but softer than usual, "my name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 34 years old and a single mother to a 9-year-old boy named Caleb. I am writing to you from my hospital bed at St. Vincent Medical Center. 3 months ago, I was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer, and my doctors tell me I likely only have a few weeks left." A faint gasp moved through the audience, but Johnny continued, his tone steady though his eyes had begun to glisten under the studio lights. "Every night, after my son goes home with my sister, I stay up to watch her show. For 1 hour, I get to forget the machines around me and the pain I'm in. You make me laugh when I don't think I can." He paused briefly, pressing his lips together before reading on. "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of leaving my son without enough memories of joy. Before I go, I have one wish. I want Caleb to hear his mom make America laugh, just once. I used to tell him silly jokes before bed, and he always said I should be on TV. Would you let me tell one joke on your show so that he can say, 'That's my mom'? I understand if you're too busy. I just thought I would ask, because you miss 100% of the chances you don't take." By now Johnny's hands were visibly trembling, and the studio audience sat frozen, many wiping tears from their faces. Even the band members stood motionless, instruments resting silently in their laps. "Thank you for helping me feel normal again," Johnny read, his voice thickening. "Thank you for giving me laughter when I needed it most. Sincerely, Rachel Monroe." When he finished, the silence lingered for several long seconds, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. Johnny folded the letter carefully and placed it on his desk, staring down at it, as if gathering his composure. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, not attempting to hide his emotion from the cameras. "Well," he said quietly, forcing a small smile, "that certainly puts my gas price jokes into perspective." A few gentle chuckles rose from the audience, more supportive than amused. Johnny looked directly into the camera lens, his expression no longer that of the late-night king of comedy, but of a man deeply moved. "Rachel," he said, speaking as though she were sitting across from him, "if you're watching tonight from that hospital room, I want you to know something. You are not too busy for us, and your son deserves to hear his mom make America laugh." The audience began to applaud softly, then more firmly, a swell of encouragement filling the studio. Johnny turned slightly toward the wings of the stage. "Alan," he called out, "can we get St. Vincent Medical Center on the phone during the break?" Alan nodded quickly and disappeared backstage as the control room scrambled to coordinate what would become an unplanned moment in live television history. Johnny leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the crowd once more, "sometimes the most important guests aren't sitting in that chair next to me. Sometimes they're watching from somewhere else entirely." The applause grew louder now, and several audience members stood to their feet. Johnny placed his hand gently on the letter again, almost protectively, as though aware that the next few minutes would change not only the course of the evening's show, but perhaps something larger. "We're going to take a short break," he announced, his voice steadier now, but still laced with emotion. "And when we come back, if all goes well, we might just have a very special comedian joining us." As the cameras pulled back and the band played a subdued transition into commercial, viewers across America sensed they had just witnessed the beginning of something far more meaningful than entertainment, a moment when laughter was about to share the stage with courage, and when a dying single mother's handwritten letter had already succeeded in doing exactly what she hoped, reminding millions that even in the shadow of goodbye, there is still room for one more joke. When the show returned from the unexpected commercial break, the atmosphere inside the studio had completely shifted. The bright, easy laughter that usually filled the set of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson was gone, replaced by a heavy, emotional stillness. Johnny Carson sat at his desk holding a telephone, his usual stack of cue cards pushed aside. "All right," he said gently, glancing toward the audience. "We have Rachel on the line from St. Vincent Medical Center." The room became so quiet you could hear the faint buzz of studio lights overhead. Johnny lifted the receiver closer to his ear. "Rachel? Can you hear me?" A soft crackle came through the speakers, followed by a fragile but steady voice. "Yes, I can hear you. Is this really Johnny Carson?" A wave of tender laughter moved through the audience. Johnny smiled warmly. "It's really me," he replied. "And there are a few million people who would love to hear your joke." There was a pause on the line. "My son's here," Rachel said softly. "He's holding my hand." Johnny leaned forward. "Well then," he said, "let's make sure he never forgets this moment." The audience applauded gently, offering encouragement. Rachel took a slow breath. "Okay," she said. "Here it goes. Why don't scientists trust atoms?" Johnny played along immediately. "I don't know, Rachel. Why don't they?" There was the smallest beat of silence. "Because they make up everything." For half a second, the studio was stunned, and then Johnny burst into genuine laughter, doubling slightly over his desk. The audience followed with loud, heartfelt laughter that carried both joy and relief. Through the phone, Rachel began laughing too, the sound bright and unguarded, cutting through the sadness of her hospital room. "Rachel," Johnny said once he caught his breath, "that was terrific." The audience rose to its feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. Applause thundered through the studio, and even members of the crew were wiping away tears. Rachel's voice trembled as she spoke again. "Thank you. That's all I wanted, for my son to hear that." Johnny nodded, though she couldn't see him. "I think he heard it," he said softly. Then he turned serious. "Rachel, I'd like to start something tonight in your name. A fund to support children who are facing the loss of a parent. I'm going to begin it with $25,000. The crowd gasped before erupting into even louder applause. On the other end of the line, Rachel began crying quietly. "You don't have to do that," she whispered. "You already gave us this moment." "No," Johnny replied gently. "You gave it to us." He paused. "Before we let you rest, is there anything you'd like to say to Caleb?" There was a soft rustle on the line. "I love you," she said tenderly. "And I want you to keep laughing. Always." Tears streamed freely now throughout the studio. Johnny swallowed hard. "Rachel," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for reminding all of us what courage sounds like." When the call ended, Johnny slowly placed the receiver back on its cradle and sat silently for several seconds. The audience remained standing, applauding not just a joke, but a mother's final gift to her son. Across America, millions of viewers sat in stunned silence, many wiping their eyes, knowing they had just witnessed something far greater than a comedy segment. They had witnessed love, bravery, and one unforgettable punchline that would echo far beyond that night. In the hours after the broadcast ended, what had begun as a quiet, handwritten request from a hospital room turned into a national wave of compassion. NBC's switchboard lit up before the closing credits had even finished rolling on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, with thousands of callers asking how they could donate, where they could write, and how they could help Rachel and her son. By the following morning, checks had begun arriving at the studio, many with notes attached that simply read, "For Caleb," or "For the brave mom who made us laugh." Within 48 hours, the newly announced Rachel Monroe Fund had already grown far beyond the $25,000 that Johnny Carson had pledged on air. Viewers from every state mailed in contributions, $5, $10, sometimes entire paychecks, each one carrying a message of support for a mother they had never met but somehow felt they knew. Rachel lived for just over 2 more weeks after that night. Nurses at St. Vincent Medical Center later said her hospital room was filled with cards, flowers, and drawings from children across the country. But what she treasured most, according to her sister, was a VHS recording of the broadcast. She asked for it to be played more than once, smiling each time she heard the roar of the audience after her punchline. Johnny visited privately during that final stretch, without cameras or press, sitting beside her bed and talking quietly about Caleb's favorite subjects in school, about baseball, about ordinary life. There were no monologues there, no studio lights, just a host and a mother sharing a human moment neither would forget. When Rachel passed away peacefully in early May, the story returned briefly to the national spotlight. Johnny opened that evening's show not with a joke, but with a few simple words about courage, explaining that sometimes the smallest request can carry the greatest meaning. He reminded viewers that Rachel had not asked for sympathy. She had asked for laughter. And in doing so, she had given her son, and millions of strangers, something enduring. The Rachel Monroe Fund continued to grow in the months that followed, eventually expanding to provide counseling services, memory books, and financial assistance for children coping with the loss of a parent. Caleb, the little boy who once held his mother's hand as she told a joke into a telephone, grew up knowing that on one extraordinary night, his mom had made an entire nation laugh. Years later, at a scholarship ceremony funded in her name, he told the audience, "Most people only get remembered by their family. My mom got remembered by millions." For Johnny, the moment remained one of the most meaningful of his long career. He had interviewed presidents, movie stars, and legends of stage and screen, but when asked in later years about the night that stayed with him most, he often spoke about a soft voice over a telephone line and a simple joke about atoms. Because that was the night late-night television paused its rhythm of punchlines and applause and became something deeper, a bridge between a hospital room and a studio stage, between a mother and her son, between grief and joy. Rachel had worried that she wouldn't leave behind enough happy memories. Instead, she left behind a legacy of laughter, generosity, and love that outlived the broadcast, outlived the headlines, and outlived even the era of television that carried her voice. And long after the studio lights dimmed and the applause faded into history, one truth remained clear. On that night, comedy wasn't just entertainment. It was a final gift.